Arthur Schopenhauer was a German philosopher born in 1788 who is known for his pessimistic view of life. He believed that life was full of suffering and that the only way to escape this suffering was to deny one as will to live. Schopenhauer wrote extensively about his ideas, and one of his most famous works is his book titled The Art of Loving. In this book, he discusses the nature of love and desire and how they relate to our will to live. Schopenhauer believed that love was a way for people to fulfill their sexual desires, and he also believed that it was a way for them to perpetuate the species. He argued that love is not based on reason or logic, but rather on our animalistic drives and instincts. However, there is one hidden truth about women that Schopenhauer feared you would discover, and that truth is that women are more in control of love than men. This is a controversial topic, but in this video, we will explore the evidence for this claim and see if there is any truth to it. Now, before we continue, I want to ask you to take some time to subscribe. If you like our content, then you'd probably also like the content of other creators. So give them a chance and you might find something new to enjoy. And so, without further ado, let's get started. Schopenhauer believed that women were more in control of love than men because they were more experienced with it. He argued that women have a stronger and more developed will to live than men, and this is why they are able to manipulate men into doing what they want. Schopenhauer was afraid that if men realized this, they would be less likely to trust women and more likely to try to control them. He thought that this would lead to a breakdown in society as we know it. In Schopenhauer's view, love is a game that women play in order to get what they want from men. They use their beauty and their sexuality to attract men, and then they use their cunning and their intelligence to manipulate them into doing what they want. Men, on the other hand, are seen as pawns in this game. They are simply used by women to satisfy their own desires. This may sound like a very cynical view of love and relationships, but it is important to remember that Schopenhauer was a pessimist. He believed that life was full of suffering and that the only way to escape this suffering was to deny one's will to live. So it is not surprising that he would have a negative view of love, which he saw as simply another way for people to satisfy their base desires. Despite his negative view of love, Schopenhauer was actually married twice and he had a son. So it seems that he was not able to completely deny his own will to live. Perhaps he simply chose to suppress it in order to focus on his work. Schopenhauer's view of women has been criticized as being misogynistic. However, it is important to remember that he was writing in a time when women were seen as inferior to men. In his defense, it could be argued that he was simply reflecting the attitudes of his time. Despite the misogyny, Schopenhauer's work has had a lasting impact on our understanding of love and relationships. His ideas have been influential in the fields of psychology and sociology, and they continue to be debated and discussed today. It is also important to note that Schopenhauer was not the only thinker of his time to have a negative view of women. For example, Friedrich Nietzsche also had a very low opinion of women. However, Nietzsche's views were more extreme than Schopenhauer's, and he is often seen as being more misogynistic. Nevertheless, both thinkers' views are representative of the attitudes towards women that were common in Europe during the 19th century. Nietzsche was born in 1844 in the Kingdom of Prussia and died in 1900. During this time period, women were still seen as property and they did not have the same rights as men. They were not allowed to vote and they were not able to own property in their own name. Additionally, women were expected to be submissive to men, and they were not allowed to pursue higher education or careers. One reason for the low status of women during this time period was the prevailing belief in the 19th century that women were inferior to men. This belief was based on a number of factors, including biological essentialism, which held that women were naturally weaker and more emotional than men. Additionally, women's limited access to education and their confinement to domestic roles were seen as evidence of their inferiority. As a result of these beliefs, women were denied many of the same rights and opportunities as men, and they were relegated to a subordinate position in society. Despite these challenges, some women did manage to make significant contributions to society during the 19th century. However, their achievements were often overlooked or downplayed due to the prevailing sexism of the time period. For example, Marie Curie, who was a pioneer in the field of radioactivity, was not awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics along with her husband and other male colleagues, despite her significant contributions to the field. Overall, the 19th century was a difficult time for women. They faced significant societal prejudice, and they were denied many of the same rights and opportunities as men. However, despite these challenges, women did make significant contributions to society, and they continued to fight for equality and recognition. Nietzsche's views on women were shaped by the societal norms and beliefs of his time. Like many others in 19th century Europe, he believed that women were inferior to men, and he held them responsible for the suffering that he believed was inherent in human existence. Let us now explore some of the specific ways in which Nietzsche's views on women were shaped by the societal norms and beliefs of his time. One way in which Nietzsche's views on women were shaped by his time was through the influence of biological essentialism. This was the belief that women were naturally inferior to men, and that this inferiority was based on their biological makeup. This belief was widely held in the 19th century, and it was based on a number of factors, including the belief that women were weaker and more emotional than men. This view of women was reflected in Nietzsche's writings, where he often portrayed women as weak and deceitful creatures who were incapable of achieving greatness. Another way in which Nietzsche's views on women were shaped by his time was through the limited opportunities available to them. In the 19th century, women were largely confined to domestic roles, and they were not able to pursue higher education or careers. This was seen as a reflection of their supposed inferiority to men, and it contributed to the belief that they were incapable of achieving anything of significance outside of their domestic roles. Nietzsche's views on women were strongly influenced by this limited perspective, and he often portrayed them as being unfit for anything beyond traditional gender roles. Furthermore, Nietzsche's views on women were also shaped by the prevailing sexism of his time. In the 19th century, women were seen as property, and they were denied many of the same rights as men. They were not allowed to vote, and they were not able to own property in their own name. Additionally, women were expected to be submissive to men, and they were not allowed to pursue higher education or careers. Nietzsche's views on women were strongly influenced by this societal sexism, and he often portrayed them as being inferior to men and deserving of their subordinate position in society. In conclusion, Nietzsche's views on women were deeply rooted in the societal norms and beliefs of his time. Through the influence of biological essentialism, limited opportunities for women, and prevailing sexism, Nietzsche came to believe that women were inferior to men, and he expressed these beliefs in his writings. It is important to note that Nietzsche's views were not entirely representative of all men of his time, as there were certainly some individuals who held more progressive views on women. However, his views were nonetheless representative of the prevailing attitudes towards women in 19th century Europe. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of the historical context surrounding Nietzsche's views on women. If you did, please don't hesitate to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Your feedback is valuable to us and helps us create more engaging content for you. Thank you for watching.